the reason why I believe one of the biggest influences, if it's pre-birth, we always got to look at the health of the mother and the environment the mother's living in, because that will influence how that child develops naturally. If the mother is highly stressed in an environment that's abusive, or violent, or it's a diet that's filled with neurotoxins or processed sugars or processed foods or genetically modified foods, then obviously that is what the baby tries and protects itself. But if you keep bombarding it, the baby can only do so much. So the body can eliminate so much. So it has this brain blood barrier, and it tries to eliminate what it doesn't need. But if you're not giving it the nutrients and that baby can't use the nutrients, then that baby will absorb them toxins and them processed foods. And that almost is what matures the brain, but it matures the nervous system. But if it's not maturing because it's not getting the nutrients, and if mother is also smoking, heavily drinking, these then leave what are called methyl marks. And then it creates this epigenetic trait where that child is now susceptible to more illnesses, more sensitivities, because mother's habits had passed down to align that child to what it feels it's going to come out to. So I think that's one way. And then also higher rates of C-section play a huge part, where there's two important reflexes. And we understand there's the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system that's also developing as well. The Moro reflex and the fear paralysis and freeze response are developing in that stage as well. And to help that mother give birth, the child helps with these important reflexes. And the important reflexes are the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. So it performs these two 90-degree turns to try and help orient itself out the womb. And it also creates this wiggle type movement for the spinal galant reflex to also help coordinate itself through the womb and to communicate with the mother. Because if you just solely relied upon the mother pushing, that will become completely exhausting for the mother. And then this is when, if the child gets stuck at any point because these reflexes haven't matured in the correct way during the birthing process, then they're signs and symptoms that we can then look at when the child enters the world, understanding that that these two reflexes weren't activated. And when they come into the world now, children are not moving the way they used to, because it's so easy for parents, and I'm guilty of it, growing up before I even knew any of this. You would just put them in front of a screen because it allows you to get on with the work, it keeps them at peace. But what that's doing is it's not maturing the brain in the correct way. And I think this is where we have to educate parents about how the brain develops, because everyone's saying screen time is bad, but I don't ever hear anyone talking about why it's bad. And they talk about cognition and they talk about it, but I'll just explain how the brain develops. So right before the brain is developing in the womb, the child's functions are predominantly gross motor skills, which reside in the right hemisphere. Now that right hemisphere and these gross motor skills are developing. That child doesn't have control over fine motor skills. They come on after. So these gross motor skills are not being used by watching the screen. And if the gross motor skills are not being used and this right hemisphere isn't developing, then what's happening is we're switching on, and this is where the addiction and the obsessive and impulsive compulsive part of the brain is stimulated, because these engineers and scientists and psychologists that create these programs on these screens, they stimulate that part of the brain which is too early for a child to be switched on. And if that's switched on too early, then that's only influencing the growth of the left hemisphere. And that left hemisphere is responsible for the impulsive, compulsive, obsessive motivation part of the brain. So if we shouldn't have access to that early, but we get access to it too early, then that prevents the social, emotional, and behavioral skills to develop correctly. So that's why now we're getting these children who are being diagnosed with ADHD, because the information that's coming in is coming in too fast. The colours, the change of the scenes, everything is at high pace, but it keeps the child's attention because that's the goal of the program. And that is what is inhibiting these social, emotional, and behavioral skills, because in the beginning, especially for the first 3 years, we should only be stimulating that right hemisphere. We should only be getting that child to crawl and to engage this social and emotional, non-verbal communication with parents. And that's why the stimulation and the interaction with parents is so, so important. Whereas if we just leave the child to just look at a screen, then this is what's going to inhibit the growth of these important skills, which are then needed for life. And now we're not getting these kids who are socially or emotionally mature enough for their chronological age. And I believe it starts right at early childhood. And even now, the psychological and the psychiatric sectors, they look at everything as being from early childhood. But brain development, if you can avoid screens before the age of 3, because we want these children to use their big, large muscles. If they do not use these gross motor skills and these fine motor skills, and the only way we're really going to use them is by exploring the environment, by movement. Movement is the only way we're going to be able to integrate these reflexes, because there's no other way to do it. And if you watch a child move, it's almost its natural way of moving. Every child will lie on its front, on its back, in its mother's arms. It's stimulated by kisses, the love, the affection, the emotion, the social. It's almost like passed down from parent to child, and it's this amazing bond. And it releases this oxytocin within mothers and also within fathers. And it creates this amazing loving bond. And if we can nurture nature, I think we then give that child the best possible advantage in developing these skill sets that they need.